Windy here today. Mad windy. Okay. Here we go. It's a bit more Protestant. Okay. Uh, this will be a put the kettle on, I guess, because I have a bit of time and there's a few things I want to discuss that tangents. So, first thing is I want to talk about is Russia have ostensibly won the war in Eastern Europe. It'll never be admitted at this point. They have held on to every objective that they wanted, and the final one, the steelworks, they've withdrawn. The Ukrainians the Azov brigades have withdrawn, and that's ostensibly the end of the war. That's it. It's over. There's the idea that Russia was being beaten in the Western media was one of the most bizarre things. But it comes from the same people who told us that, people who locked us down over a killing virus, the same people. The media, particularly the Irish media, was all last week was talking about Putin would now be arrested by his own generals because the Russian army had been so soundly defeated in Eastern Europe, in that part of the world. And I was like, where did they get this from? And it was all these articles written by academics at Irish universities, quackademics, who didn't know any more than anyone. And they weren't even articles or appraisals, they were all wishful thinking. Now, last week we were told that Russia was over as a country, it would dissolve. This is the kind of stuff that journalism today is a mirror reflection of the psychosis that infects the globalists. You see, what's wishful thinking for the globalists, like the coronavirus never ending and all of us being locked down or injected or waiting to die, is reflected in this is why journalism, they don't have proper journalists anymore. They don't have people who had lives. In the past, journalists tend to be working class people, and they tended to come from working class families, and they had lives. Some were policemen. A lot of them had been in combat in the military. Well, nowadays the average journalist is a namby-pamby upper middle class type with no life experience, and doesn't know reality, and thinks that a government, university, or corporate press release is retyping that out into a paper or reading on the news is the same thing as what journalism is, just regurgitating almost verbatim a press release from only from a big corporation, a government, or an academic, a university. Otherwise, they won't quote it. They won't even feature it. So this is what journalism today is like. That's John Waters is bang on the money when he says the reason why conspiracy theorists exist is because journalism is dead, and every true journalist should be a conspiracy theorist at heart. They go with a hunch and they work out and see they try to find a dialogue as to an investigation to research the truth. But the Ukraine thing is over. It's done. They won't officially have a surrender, or there won't be any kind of. It'll be a stalemate, of course. The reason for this is, politicians lack honor anywhere, and they can never ever admit they've been defeated in any way, and they are they're all bitch men in politics. They'll never admit that they were wrong about the Rona. They would never admit they were wrong about the Needlecraft. They'll never admit they were wrong about Russia on its last legs, because it takes a man to admit when he's defeated. But these are bitch men. These are bitch men who run the world. Your leadership are nearly all bitch men. And so they're surly little bitches who will do things like they'll ignore it. They'll just put it on the long finger and not talk about it. And occasionally the news will have a story about Russian-occupied areas that were formerly part of the Ukraine. And they'll say things. They'll make up stories. I mean, I have to laugh. The Zelensky will definitely fall from grace now. There's absolutely no doubt about that. He has definitely been a fraud who has ridden his luck. And how I know he's a fraud is because our Prime Minister, Micheál Martin, has a boy band fixation like with him. And this is when mediocrity recognizes mediocrity, it knows itself. Know thyself through what you associate with. So therefore, the reason why Micheál Martin, an incredibly mediocre man who would who has no guts and will sell this country out just for basically keeping his career safe. And his, that's really what his job is. Micheál Martin's entire job is to not let himself down at any cost. So therefore, he looks at Zelensky, and mediocrity represents mediocrity. And and same with Biden and the rest of them, and they're utterly terrified of Putin. But the real reason why Putin is hated is not because of the Ukrainian incursion into and remember they were saying things like the battle for Kiev. There was no intention for the battle of Kiev. They didn't want Kiev. They wanted just the certain territories, mostly with Russian ethnic populations, and also areas that were strategic for in terms of attacking, potentially building chemical and weapons plants next to Russia. They got the land they wanted, they're holding, and that's the end of it. We'll never hear about it ever again. In 20 or 50 years' time, that land will be quietly, officially ceded to Russia. But aside from Russian, they were telling us only last week this was the end of the Putin and his empire. Russia has never been stronger. Russia will come out of this a superpower, and that's what really, really irritates Biden and the U.S., particularly the Democrats. What Russia has done in the Ukraine is the complete antithesis of what happened with Biden in Afghanistan. Now, did Biden admit defeat by the Taliban? Nah, of course not. He just, like, bitch man. It takes a man to admit defeat. Trump said we were beaten by them, end of story. And the fact that all our equipment wasn't taken out and left, and we ran away with our tails between our legs is a disaster. And like now, Afghanistan is one of the most powerful military countries in the world, simply because they beat NATO. And NATO, people going on about Finland and Sweden joining NATO is leading us to war. That's really showing us the weakness of NATO. And NATO spends about half its time talking about its transgender and its LGBTQ troops. So this is one of the reasons. The main reason that Putin is hated was that speech he made, funny enough, only a few months before the invasion of those parts of Ukraine. Incursion, no, it wasn't an invasion, it was incursion, because they weren't after the whole country, they're only after certain parts of it. And when he said that the West was insane, that children are being taught there's no such thing as men and women, that men can have babies and all this stuff. This was the real reason why the Western powers targeted Putin. I'm not saying Putin's a hero or anything like that. I'm just saying this is the realpolitik. This is observing it from the outside as it is. And that was the real reason. The only reason they brought Finland into this whole thing is because it's almost like to torment the Russians because of what happened in World War II at the Winter War, where the Finns defeated the Russians in the Soviets. But a lot of it had to do with the Stalin sending troops into Finland without overcoats to fight in winter. It was that was more to do with the Bolsheviks and how the communists and how they behaved, and NKVD. And how can you fight when you don't have clothes or food in the winter? And that's literally what the Russians did, the Soviets did with their own troops. And the Finns had a chance to completely defeat the Russians. They had encircled Leningrad, Leningrad then, St. Petersburg now, and they had enough they had enough artillery to bombard and take the city. And Hitler told them to, and the Finns said, no, we only wanted the territory back that they took. So the Finns behaved with remarkable honour, but it was always a sore thing to the Russians that the Soviets, that they were defeated by Finland, the small countries in the north. So, assuming the bitch men of the West, thinking it would actually mean something, have said, let's hurt them by being bitches and get Finland to join. Just to remind them of when they lost the Winter War. See, they're bitch men. Trudeau, bitch men. They're all bitch men. There's no men in them. There's no honour in any of them. They're all bitch men. And if we lived in a different time, and we would have lived in a different time, there would now be a conference set up called the Odessa Conference to decide the territorial claims of Russia's successful incursion and decisive military victory over the Ukrainian forces in that part of the world. And that would be the end of it. But no, we live in an age of, so they can't admit that Putin won. The ruble is flying. have the economy is through the roof. They're having they're exact opposite of the West. They've all the food, oil, money, and everything else they need. They're doing great, and they've had a great military victory in their minds. And the West, hasn't. Well, the Afghanistan thing with Biden really was a signal sent out by NATO and the U.S. military, who were more had a greater agenda putting American troops in high heels and miniskirts, male ones, than they did actually fighting wars. So that was the signal for the Russians to go, they're all cowards and weak. And they are all cowards and weak, and they're all mentally ill. And Trump and Putin said this. They're all mentally ill. And they are. They're all mentally ill. Like the video I made yesterday. So that's the first thing. You can take it from me, Russia has won that war. There will be remarkable theatric gymnastics in the Western media, particularly in this part of the world, the English-speaking countries, the Anglosphere, will try to stitch it all ways around to say how Russia kind of really lost, that kind of thing. Rather than just admit they won, we lost. And Zelensky's star will now begin to fall. You'll see more and more mainstream articles about the Azovs and the neo-Nazi troops he openly has, and battalions, and it will start to come out about the massacres of Ukrainian citizens by the Ukrainian Azov battalions, their own people. And I had to laugh. They said, the Irish media reported today, there was a bloodbath at the steelworks. 13 civilians were killed. Jesus Christ, NATO killed at least, and it may be double, 500,000 in Iraq, civilians. And here they are going on about 13, like, that's sad and everything, but that's what happens in wars. 13, it's the end of the world. It's just unbelievable. So that's because they're cowards and they can't admit their own faults and their own failings. This is one of the reasons the West is kind of doomed in many ways, is because we don't have politicians who are men. We don't have leadership who are men, who admit defeat. Now, another thing I want to say is Elon Musk is absolutely 100% a plant by the globalists. I know many of you are excited, and that's okay about the Twitter thing, and I don't blame you. And of course, there's the whole thing of like, my enemy's enemy is my friend kind of thing. And it's great, the torture that's been done in Twitter over it. But I have been watching videos of him in recent days. I think he's an absolute fraud. For starters, he's a moron. Elon Musk, they tried to make out that he's some kind of like, what's the word? Like a kind of a savant, an Asperger's genius. He is a moron. He can't answer basic questions that don't revolve around how wonderful are you. I don't believe the whole space thing he has or anything like that. I don't believe anything about him. I believe that he was created by the CFO or Tavistock or one of these groups and put out there for that reason. There is nothing about him that in any way screams what he's supposed to be. It's the same thing as, you know what he is to me? He's the industrialist version of Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden was clearly created as that same kind of concept. Oh, we have someone on the inside who's going to blow the whistle. Ooh, let's see what Edward Snowden has to say today. Oh, it's going to be devastating for the governments. They can use your cell phone to spy on you when you put on your geo-tracking options. Water is wet, except when it's not wet, it's dry. Then it's steam. Wow. And we're going to have, I'm Edward Snowden. I'm going to destroy Western governments with this latest piece of information. War isn't very nice. That's literally Edward Snowden, and he says he's obviously a creation. Like, let's think about people who are I'm almost certain now are creation and plants. Edward Snowden, 100% a creation of the intelligence services to create a false belief that on the inside was this someone on your side blowing the whistle. Elon Musk, creation of the intelligence services, put out there to believe that there was this millionaire who was going to right the wrongs in the world using his money, i.e. Twitter. And that's the reality is woke has just ended. Caitlyn Jenner, the former runner, Bruce, what's his name? Um, he's absolutely, he was, okay, here's a guy who had all the attention in the world showered at him when he was an athlete. And suddenly on the cusp of the whole trans thing, he's put out there as a public figure. I'm convinced that he's like CFR, Tavistock, 5 against 1 of them. He's working for them. And if, like, there's loads of them, right? They're all, they're all, they all have the same thing in common. They're not inspiring people. They're mediocre. And we live in the age of mediocrity. You have the Stone Age, the Digital Age, the Steel Age, Iron Age, the Bronze Age. This is the mediocrity age. And this, I had no, I was on the fence about Elon Musk, really. I didn't know a lot about him. But in the last few days, I've been looking into him. And he is an absolute moron. He is absolutely a puppet. He can't hold a conversation. He can't talk about anything. His job is just to appear. They even picked a guy that had a weird name because you're more likely to remember a weird name than you are to remember you know, a normal. His name is Billy O'Brien, or Jeff Jones. You would don't you do the pass through your consciousness because you meet people like that. But how many of us met an Elon Musk? They know exactly what they're doing. It's absolutely, those of you who have hope in Elon Musk, you're okay. I get the whole Twitter thing, but I think a lot of it has to do because someone at the top has said pull the plug on woke. I believe that served their agenda enough. They got what they want from it. Pull the plug on woke. Now, Dave Cullen, aside from his excellent political views, also does good movie reviews, and he likes Star Trek. And he reviewed the new Star Trek show, and it got me really thinking about other things. But it's on his YouTube channel, Computing Forever. But the new Star Trek show has a really promising premise. I don't know if you're into the show, but there was a character in the original series called Captain Pike, and he was basically mutilated and left in a life support machine wheelchair, and he was Spock's original commander before Kirk. And in that episode, it's a pivotal episode, actually, the one in the original series, because it introduced you to what Spock really is as a person, his personality. Now, the prequel series they have now has an actor playing quite a good actor playing Captain Pike, and you have a young Spock and a young Uhura. So that's they're kind of still there. Now, it's you compare the two series next to each other, and you can see the changes in reality of the world we live in. Now, the young Spock is nothing like the Leonard Nimoy version. He's more like Zuckerberg. He's like a Mark Zuckerberg. He's socially awkward around girls. He he doesn't have kind of like social behavior understandings, and the assumption is because he's younger and he's half Vulcan, half human, that he's still learning human stuff. But he's not. He's a complete nerd. He's a complete like socially inadequate geek, and that's like nothing like what Spock was. As a result, he's portrayed in this kind of awkward way, and that's like that's just such bullshit. Now, if you look at the original Star Trek series from the 60s, you got an insight into how military structure was actually run. You had the officer class, like say you had like the central core of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. They were officers, so in casual situations, they refer to themselves by first name. He's dead, Jim, or Spock saying, "As your friend, Jim," this kind of thing. And they were friends outside protocol, which is one of the things that make the show so very appealing, was that relationship between McCoy, Spock, and Kirk. It was a beautiful written aspect to that. Here they were, three career military men and a Vulcan. Well, two of them a Vulcan, half Vulcan. Yet they, for all McCoy's slagging off of Spock, there was no doubt in his mind of the, unbreachable respect that McCoy had for Spock, and Spock had for McCoy, and they both had for Kirk, and he had for them. Now that was in a personal situation when they were being attacked by Romulans or wherever, and they were on the bridge. You would have you. He wouldn't say call him Jim. He would say Captain. And this is around the regular staff, the subordinates, right? The subordinates, lower ranks, and or on planets, and it was First Officer Spock, Doc, Chief Medical Officer McCoy, Captain Kirk. Formal rankings were mentioned when in that situation. And so that's classic military. That's how it was. The officers, when they're in the officers' mess, will refer to each other by first name, and they will also in the in protocol, military protocol, they will be by rank and very businesslike. Now, another aspect of the early show you see is the demarcation between the officers and the rest. You had, although Kirk was liked by his is the people, the troops under his command, Starfleet under his command, the crew of the Enterprise, they knew their place. He was the boss, and there was I cannot remember a single episode outside someone being possessed or drunk of any kind of insubordination shown by a lower ranked member of the crew towards McCoy, Spock, or Kirk. There may have been light-hearted playing like that someone like Uhura could get away with, but otherwise it was all business, and you knew your rank. There was nothing out. It was just assumed, right? If what Dave pointed out in this new Star Trek show, and also I've seen it in lots of other shows, is lots of condescension by lower ranked crew members in military films. I'm seeing this now against officers. So there's lots of eye rolling. There's lots of passive aggressive remarks. Now, if you were in a real military, I don't know what the military is like now. I hope it's not like this. But if you were in a real military situation and you had say a corporal rolling their eyes and making a snide remark to a senior officer, well, that's a court-martial offence. But these shows are full of this. Oh, rolling the eyes. Oh, really? Yeah. Like lower rank crew members going to like officers like, oh, really? Yeah, right. Whatever you say. Oh, you sure about that? This is like, what the fuck? You'd never get that in. But a lot of these shows, whether they're to do with the U.S. Air Force or any kind of military, all Americans, of course, any Hollywood show revolving the military now, there's always lower ranked troops who are like eye rolling like bitches. What? As your commanding officer, I'm telling you that you have to go and install that piece of machinery. Oh, really? Huh? Well, whatever. You know what? Good thing I know what I'm doing. That's literally what's in these shows now, right? Now, this has to be part of a wider agenda. And after I was watching Dave's review of the new Star Trek series, I started thinking about, like, that was when he mentioned the fact there's lots of condescension to higher ranks. I was looking at that and saying, yeah, that's all over the place now. What's going on? Because I'd already kind of noticed it in other shows and movies. And it's about the destruction of it's part of their great reset. It's part the destruction and the discarding and the be gone with you of older generation and experience. And while in Western society, one of the reasons Western society has flourished is because the new generations, the younger people come along with a sense of irreverence at some levels, cultural sense of irreverence, for previous generations' things that they held to be sacrosanct. And this is one of the beauties of Western society. This allowed new ideas to come in, but they weren't like that. They happened because the new generation had brilliant new ideas. The new generation had new music, new art, new playwriting, new literature, new everything, new ways of approaching. It wasn't that, and that's why that was vital to Western civilization. Well, what do young people bring today? Well, they're 57 genders. They, BLM, LGBTQ, uh, Greta Thunberg, classic example. They have nothing to offer. Young people today, if anything, worship politicians as gods. It's really bizarre. So it's not like, and this all plays like Greta Thunberg. I'm glad I mentioned her, right? When she was at the height of the peak of her hype, we won't call it fame, it was media and hype, right? She was 1.5 years away from active military service and voting in Sweden. She was 16 and a half. But she deliberately dressed and looked like she was about 8 or 9. And she's sitting there with this arrogance. I demand you do this. Governments will have to learn from young people. Blah, blah, blah. Now, the paedophiles were usually turned on by this. There was a big paedophilic element among white middle class men were turned on by this. But it was also this ponytailed doom goblin from the north was there to lecture adults on how stupid they were when she was, like Elon Musk, another moron who couldn't string a sentence together. But it was all this. It was designed to. It was just a, it was the real life version of what you see on Star Trek and other shows involving military protocol and ranks. Now it's like, oh yeah, whatever, huh? What do you know, General? This kind of thing, and it was a real life version of that. A real life version of that, and we're seeing that all the time now. This we have a situation, and it's the globalists want it badly because they want to erase any sense of what the old world was like to replace it with a younger ones as possible. Now, one of the most insidious agendas of recent times is to try and bring down the voting age. In some countries, they're talking about 14 and 13. Now, you sh- you shouldn't be allowed to vote. I even think 18 is too young to vote. I think voting should be closer to 40 or something because most people don't have any sense until they're nearly 40. That's when they've had life experience, and then they've had to do all the things to do and survive in society, and then they can make informed decisions. The reason why the globalists want 12, 13-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-olds voting is because they will vote entirely upon MTV Rock the Vote. Remember that? That was the beginning of it all. That somehow we're the next generation and you get the fuck out of here. We're the next generation and we have to have our say. No, you'll have your say when you achieve. So, and this also ties in the mediocrity thing. The more I look at the whole trans thing today, there's only a tiny amount of those people who need to medically transition. The majority of what I can see of the trans types are mediocre, failed white boys and white men who've achieved nothing in their lives. They're nothing to look at. They're nothing to talk about. They've achieved nothing. They have nothing to offer really society as a whole. They crave attention. They crave accolades. How do you do that? You put on a wig, your mother's wig, and you declare yourself that you're now trans, and suddenly you're stunning and brave for playing. Now it's interesting. What they're really doing is they're playing children's dress up. You know the way when little kids are younger, like toddlers, they play dress up. And the boys will do it too. They'll take their mammy's dress or their daddy's chumpers, but like it's often the mother's clothes because it's generally more accessible. And like remember E.T. in the movie E.T., the little girl dressed up E.T. as a woman. The same thing happens with little boys. Little boys are their older sisters. Now, I'm talking about older. I mean, she might be 7 and he might be 5, will dress him up in her mammy's clothes. Well, that's what the Gender Recognition Act in Ireland, which is an absolutely appalling document, allows basically someone who's achieved nothing in their life, basically a useless human being, to put on one of their mother's wig when he's 45 and say, I'm no longer willing to live a lie. And everyone goes, he's so stunning and brave. So it's part of the age of mediocrity stuff. Of course, there are people who do need the transition. I have no problem with them. But there's the most of them today are just mediocre white boys who just found the way to get a little bit of praise. And that'll last for a little while, and then they'll be back to the schlubs and losers they always were. It's like that, I'm an achiever. It comes from that kind of thing. I'm an achiever. I'm wearing my mother's dress. I'm an achiever. Her wigs and her lovely hairdress. I'm an achiever. Look at me posting my pictures of makeup on. I look like fucking the Cenobite. Yeah. And you'll say, oh, so beautiful. Look at my Ukrainian flag, my LGBTQ face mask, and I'm an achiever. You're a fucking loser, and you know you're a fucking loser. And you can call me all the names in the world you want. It won't change the fact that you're a fucking loser. And your own mother, who might have a photograph taken next to you, going, I'm proud of my son, my 47-year-old son who achieved nothing with his life. He's come out. He's now transitioned. I'm so proud of him. Deep down inside, she hates your fucking guts, and she knows what a big loser you are as well. She does. You're a loser. You've achieved nothing. You have just compensated for a life of failure by putting on women's clothes. That's all you've done. You've achieved nothing. You are a symptom of a sickness that runs throughout the society, and it's nothing to do with changing genders or sexual lifestyles. It's to do with started with things like The X Factor and Big Brother and all these shows. It's a chance for mediocrity. I'm not saying the people who were on X Factor and America's Got Talent, the ones who made it towards the end, but I used to watch those shows just purely for the the initial, when they go to cities around and they have people on there, and you see people that announce a talent, but they were desperate to be noticed or be famous. They're all putting on wigs on now and going, I've transitioned. Worship me. That's what's happening. That's what's happening. And it's not good. It's not good for us. It's not good for you. It's not good for society. And then they have laws protecting them. Instead of pointing out the reason why you're wearing your mother's wig and your mother's dress and you're on the Max Factor is not because you're cool or interesting. You're not Robert Smith in The Cure. You're Billy McGinty from Finglas, who achieved nothing with his life. You get a lot of that in Ireland. Like, Ireland is the greatest. The Irish society in nowadays is the ultimate mediocrity society. Totally, it's unbelievably mediocre. And the Irish are to mediocrity what the Brazilians are to soccer. And it's served our political system very, very well. It's very, very well. And this is why we have criminal cartels essentially running this country. And it's amazing, one of the biggest criminal cartels running this country is the concrete industry. The concrete industry is, in Ireland, we build everything with concrete, even though there's numerous other ways to build, steel frame, the lot. But one of the reasons we have an active concrete mafia who create NIMBYs, fake protests to make sure that nothing is built from wood or steel. It's all steel cladding or wood cladding on steel like you build in many other countries. It's not done here because the concrete mafia own this country. And so basically, if you want to build something small, and say if you want to build a small stadium, in this country, and you apply for a planning permission and say, how are you building it? It's steel frame construction with cladding. Oh, you can't have it. It has to be built with concrete. Why? This is standard all over Europe. No, no, no. You have to using planning permission as you build it with concrete, and that becomes from the concrete industry owning the planning process. This is why when they want to build tall buildings in Dublin, out of the blue, this local residents group will appear to say no. And what it is about is the concrete industry has sniffed out that they can't get their snouts in the trough of this latest construction because it's steel clad or something. But it was all poured concrete. There'd be no objections against it because the concrete industry wouldn't. And it's been caught. They've been openly caught paying people to protest different concrete suppliers and stuff to over the years. And I won't even go into the Quinth story of the Ireland's richest man. But this is the mafia. It's one of the mafias that run Ireland. It's the concrete industry. It's one of the reasons our infrastructure is so backward. And like things like we don't have decent, decent under metros and under citywide, what you call it, suburban rail systems. There's no money in it for the concrete industry. When the government here makes makes an infrastructural plan, they literally sit down with the concrete industry and who dictates and build this, this, and this because they'll make money. That's where their money is. That's one of the reasons for the massive overruns on the children's hospital here. It's built. We're using, and concrete. It's hilarious. Is actually one of the most environmentally destructive methods of creating a product. It's hugely expensive in terms of its carbon footprint if you want to go down that route. But they won't do steel cladding here and steel framework because the concrete. That's like a simple thing, right? But there's no one to challenge that. The mediocrity. There's nothing but mediocrity in politics to challenge that. They'll never come forward and say, no, for instance, they've now stopped building in Ireland because they said the cost of concrete, they've now said the cost of construction in Ireland has gone through the roof, right? It hasn't. The cost of producing concrete, giving and servicing the concrete mafia has gone through the roof. If they were to switch construction methods here to steel frame and steel cladding, like everywhere else, with wood interiors, that would mean that huge numbers of everything could be built that are in demand without having to wait for the concrete mafia to get their snouts in the trough. But because we have mediocre politicians who don't think about things, they would say, shit, we're going to have to stop building this, that, and the other because of the cost of concrete. Well, they won't say it's a building supplies, but it's really concrete. None of them would actually come forward and say, well, let's go the steel cladding route. The steel frame, what? But we've always done concrete. So there, a lot of. Are you telling me we should do something different? That would, But when it comes to actual things needed for a society, politicians are morons. Civil servants, bureaucrats are morons. But when it comes to doing something like, I don't know, spray painting the rainbow flag over the country, they'll organise it to like military precision. Like I said yesterday, if we had a massive economic collapse and it came down to hormone patches for transitioning teens or baby formula, the current Minister for Children would say, fuck the baby formula, get the transitioning hormones for teens. That's much more important. That we have an inclusive society. You see, this is the mediocrity. It's easy for mediocrity to create an inclusive society. Their diversity, right? It's easier for them. It's easier for mediocrity to hire in government to hoist up a rainbow flag than it is to build a fucking bridge. You understand? You see the point I've been trying to make to you for years? It's easier for mediocre politicians to grandstand about diversity than it is to actually build a hospital. You see why the mediocre thing is so bad? And that's why we have these bumbling anoraks in government. We don't have people who could sit down and make a decision. They won't do it because their whole lives have been driven by mediocrity. So it's easier to go along with the globalist than it is to make an agenda for your own country. And this is why they hate Putin, because Putin is not owned by the CFR, not owned by Tavistock, not owned by the World Bank or the World Economic Forum. Yeah, I know you're all you conspiracy theorists. Oh, but he appeared in fucking he appeared at the WEF. So what? For fuck's sake, I work for Goldman Sachs. Am I today a banker running the fucking world on their behalf? Wake the fuck up. Life goes through all. See, these truthers have never been there. They sit in their council estate in the English Midlands going, and this kind of thing. And then somewhere in some shithole like Drogheda and Iron, Morningside Park, Drogheda. It's all shells. And they've never done anything with it. I just don't understand that a person who's lived a certain life by a certain age has done all kinds of things and been in all kinds of situations, but doesn't mean they're trapped in that one thing forever. So Putin is obviously not owned by the globalists, and anyone who says it is like, you've got your tinfoil hat is just a little too thick. Having said that, do I think Putin is a great guy? No, I don't. I don't see him as a savior or anything like that, but I do know enough that he's rattled the shit out of the West. And again, like the Twitter thing, my enemy's enemy is my friend. It was because of his incursion, and it wasn't even an invasion, it was an incursion into the Ukraine is the reason why Ireland stopped all its COVID restrictions, so we could bring in all these rainbow. And that's another thing. It's easier. It would be easier for the Irish. It's easier for the mediocrity in Irish politics to bring over Ukrainian refugees into Ireland than it would be to house their own people to solve the housing crisis. Because mediocrity will always go for the platitude. Mediocrity will always go for its mother's wig to say, look at me now, I'm stunning and brave. Mediocrity will always go to like, I really relate to those poor people there, and then their own kids are neglected, And this is the issue we have in the rest, and they want this mediocrity instead of rising to the challenges of the world, would rather erase anyone over 50 or even 40 at this point, and have all 12 and 13-year-olds voting for romper room politics. And that's why the expert, we live in but you see, mediocrity is like a rat backed into a corner. When mediocrity is not winning, it can be the biggest evil bitch going. As you saw with Biden's attempt to actually bring in a ministry of truth into the US recently, that was quite rightly shut down before it was killed before it even began. And that's mediocrity. And that's because mediocrity, when it's put into a corner, is vicious. Or also when it's been given a little bit of power. When our collective politicians in the countries where we were really badly locked down, think of New Zealand, think of Ireland, think of Victoria, think of Scotland, not as bad, think of Canada, right? And think of the states in the US that are badly locked down. Then compare the governments in those states to the guy in your office who's a useless asshole, who doesn't do any work, who's lazy and goofs off all the time, takes endless cigarette breaks, suddenly becoming a woman by wearing a wig one day, and you can't say nothing about it because you'll be done for being a bigot. And he's strutting around the office, she strutting around the office now going like, I can do whatever I want. Well, that was Jacinta Ardern, Leo Varadkar, Justin Trudeau, Dan Andrews. That was them. That's mediocrity getting power. When mediocrity gets power, it is a psychic dictatorship and tyranny. Now, speaking of psychic and the psychic weather, I now realize why the Renfield thing was off the scale in the last few weeks. It's because Russia won. That's why. And the Renfields always reflect what the psychological state of the zeitgeist, of the power control systems. And behind the scenes, the Western leadership is absolutely imploding right now because of what Russia. This is why the WEF has to have basically an army protecting them, because they've been found out. The World Health Organization is not going to get away with its. See, this is another thing. Mediocrity. If you're a mediocre politician, it's much easier for the World Economic Forum, the EU, or the The World Health Organization to run your country, you still get paid a big salary, but you dedicate. Oh, we have to. Oh, I'm sorry, we have to abide by an international treaty we signed. These international treaties are done not to make the world a more cohesive and better place, but to absolve nation governments of their actual personal and local devotion to their people. No, they'd rather, oh, you can't have a house, I'm giving it to Ukrainians because we signed up to international refugee protocols. Not my fault. No, it is your fault. You're mediocre and you didn't go and say to them, I'll put the people of my country before I put any of your international agendas forward. And this is why with this you think of like songs like where it's I was talking to someone the other week. I won't mention his name, but he was wondering if he saw some of the conspiracy stuff where the Beatles a Tavistock creation, and apparently they were a rubbish band, and suddenly they're really. I don't know about any of that, but what I do know is that John Lennon's Imagine, that song has been used to bring us to the misery we are today. You remember, there's this, you know, when I see people, when you go to somewhere like TikTok and you see all these Cenobites and sleep paralysis demons with all their makeup and everything on them, I'm reminded of the same scene in. Do you remember that movie Cabaret with Liza Minnelli? There's a scene in the outdoor cafe in Berlin with Michael York talking to his friend, and suddenly, out of the blue, a young brown shirt Hitler youth goes up and starts singing "Tomorrow Belongs to Me," and he hypnotizes everyone else there, and they're all doing this. The Nazis look go, "Tomorrow belongs to me," and then Michael York goes, "We've got to get the hell out of this country." Well, that's how I feel when I look at those today, because those Cenobites and sleep paralysis demons, those rainbow flagged woke Cenobites and sleep paralysis demons on TikTok, that's "Tomorrow Belongs to Me" for us. Now, we don't have another planet we can go to because it's planetary at this point, but we can create a parallel society, which you should. And so people say to me, "Is that's a huge deal?" Oh no, it's not. It's very simple. The first one is to throw away your TV. I'm getting ads for Virgin cable TV here on YouTube in Ireland, and the ads say something like, "Be the envy of all your neighbours by getting all the latest shows on Virgin Media." Now, I'm so far from normie society that I can't. I'd forgotten that there was that in normie society. Yeah, something like having access to the latest shows on your cable box before the neighbours is actually an achievement, and that's just even recognizing that and the madness of that is enough to build a parallel society. It all begins with baby steps. Like the simple little things you can do. Throw away your fucking TV and just use it for watching classic movies, or just be like, if something new comes out like the Star Trek show, watch it out of curiosity. And that's why I think Dave Cullen does a good public service with those sci-fi movie reviews, because he's looking beyond just the superficial stuff. So there's that element of it, but don't become addicted to it or anything like that, and then switch it off immediately if it's over, and or be like I do, go around the pound shops and the charity shops and get all the DVDs, or at CEX where you can get like fantastic DVD set collections and things like that. And storing food, I can't stress this enough. The most important thing you could do when storing food is to not watch any of those American prepping channels where Bubba from Kentucky is going, you need to use a Mylar extraction system with propane, with an ion gas eliminator to take out this way you'll store, you need $80,000 equipment. No, don't be, and apart from that, they're always going on making Bible quotes, and they have names like Preppers for Christ and stuff like that. No, 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 no. A pantry. All our grandparents and great grandparents had pantries. What they were was 6, 8 months worth of canned and dried goods, just in case. That's prepping. That's food storage, okay? And even if there is no downturn or massive inflationary pressures come along, you would not believe the sense of security having canned and dried goods stored up, a year's worth of food stored up. Uh, it just does something to your soul that shows that you're not mediocre. It shows that you can actually, it's not paranoid, it's not terrified. It's just, it's a simple, beautiful thing that it was things like storage that created Western civilization. And when you build a pantry, you're building a parallel society outside the commercial, instantaneous. I'm telling you, if and I'm not saying it will happen, but if I mean, supermarket shelves are already starting to empty. I'm seeing it all the time now. They don't fill up like it was 2 or 3 years ago, where like they could buy as much as they wanted out of the supermarket. The truck arrived that afternoon. That once the computers would put it up, they packed out. There would never be a shortage of anything. Now the shelves are going way back into the back. And so this is the supply chains have all been damaged by both the lockdowns, which will be seen in centuries to come as a catastrophic decision made by mediocre politicians and supported by mediocre media, and also the Russian situation, the situation in Eastern Europe. And so this might be temporary. It might be okay. But you look what's going on in Sri Lanka, you have to be ready for that. You have to have contingency. You have to have the pantry. So my attitude was a pantry fights mediocrity. And that's such a simple and easy thing to do. It requires very little work, but it requires a bit more work than wearing a wig and wanting to be worshipped as a god. Because you live in an age of mediocrity, you are mediocre, and you can't do anything else that requires genuine accolades from others. And take careful note now of what I'm saying in films and TV shows, like when they show a military situation, the lower ranking one going to the officers, and that's all part of the agenda to discount anything that has experience, knowledge, and wisdom to pass down to next generations, because they basically want a world where the sum total of human civilization has been thrown into the scrap heap and the bin and replaced with Greta Thunberg and Elon Musk, and God fucking help us if that's what they want. Because, well, it is what they want, but God help us if you fall for that. There's no reason to. Parallel society, sanguine gnosis. Take care, talk to you later.